Zack Snyder's Justice League. What is there to say about this extended director's cut of a movie that originally flopped hard? I don't know if there's much I can say because I'm not too much as a DC fan as much as a lot of people, and I have not seen the original Justice League movie, and judging by people's response to this cut, I don't think I need to watch the original version. And even after watching this extended, almost 4 hour long cut, I just think to myself, it's still heavily flawed. There's a lot of focus on sequel baiting, which is a trait that I've come to dislike a wee bit. It's not always structured right, and there's still a few choices on the filmmaker's part that just don't make any sense, like Jesse Eisenberg is still Lex Luthor. Look, I get that Jesse Eisenberg's a smart guy. I have more respect for Zack Snyder now, but Jesse Eisenberg would have been better suited for Riddler. But I'm not here to rant about this movie per se. Because Jesse Eisenberg, I'm sure, is a fine fella, and makes for excellent performances if the casting is right. And Zack Snyder certainly makes great films when he gets it right. Today I wanted to talk about the Snyder Cut from a unique perspective, not necessarily from a hardcore DC fan's perspective, but from a passionate storyteller's perspective. I've had filmmaking experience, and I know the turmoils and trials that goes into making films. I can understand the passion to tell a story. And watching the Snyder Cut, not that I've seen the original cut, but there was something emanating throughout this entire director's cut that I've noticed. This entire movie was emanating with something that I could only muster up into one word: passion. All throughout this cut, there was a lot of passion put into so much more of what was being presented. The characters had better character arcs, the stakes were higher, there was much more time to develop the scenario, as well as how big everything was. The special effect had a vast improvement. And this film was just so big, they split it up into different chapters, like a prologue and part 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and even an epilogue. There's a part of me that loves that cinematic endeavor of establishing black screen, fade, part 1, part 2. It's a sort of thing you'd see in like a few Samurai Jack episodes. I just love this idea that the story is so big that to split certain parts of the story up, it just needs a blank screen and faded titles to establish what's next. And a YouTuber that I follow named Durbania, who's a more enthusiastic nerd than me, describes watching these different parts like reading different chapters of a book. You can watch or kind of watch all of it at once, or you can stop at certain parts and come back to it later with the full context of what's happening in mind. I was watching the Snyder Cut with two of my friends, Squid Jedi, aka Squid Bear, Brooks Gallinghouse, as well as Winning Charlie from the Stardust app. We took several days to watch this because it's a long movie. In terms of ambitious director's cuts, I think it's safe to say this is going to be up there with the extended editions of The Lord of the Rings or even the director's cuts of Blade Runner. There's something unique about director's cuts. There are just times where the business of Hollywood and filmmaking, stuff like that, demand that for the sake of the casual audiences, that much of the film would be taken down. And then the directors would come back later to complete their vision. Well, actually, sometimes they do have their visions complete, but for the sake of the theatrical version, they cut bits out of it, but then they have their own versions to fix certain things. A lot of people tend to like the director's cuts better. Even if they have to sit through certain bits for the sake of it being longer, they get more out of it. Now, this director's cut has a very personal ambition as to why this director's cut was delayed. And I want to take this very seriously. Though we'll start off with something quite snarky. Zack Snyder making a better effort than Joss Whedon. There's a first. Okay, joke's over. Time to get serious. Zack Snyder, Joss Whedon, you're both wonderful directors, okay? Hey, Joss Whedon changed his mind. Now, Zack Snyder was going to make quite an ambitious movie, despite some previous blunders with Man of Steel and Batman vs. Superman. Unfortunately, he had to stop part of his filmmaking because he had a personal tragedy in his family. I'll explain the full extent of this tragedy later. So while Zack was grieving, Joss Whedon took the mantle to complete the movie for a theatrical cut. And it's strange how a man could make two masterpieces of superhero filmmaking like The Avengers, yet somehow it didn't work here. Must be a mixture of Hollywood desperation. Not to mention I heard a rumor that Joss Whedon did something very mean. But we're not talking about that. To make a long story short, this version of Justice League that came out in theaters was not well received. It was trying to be a bit too goofy and light-hearted compared to Zack Snyder's, ironically, too serious movies. It's hard to get the mixture right. Jokes didn't quite land, editing was questionable, and general effects set looked like it was only partially done. It took many years later for Zack Snyder to come back and add in so many more scenes, and the final version did have some scenes from the theatrical cut, but with many, many, many more scenes getting into personal character development of Cyborg and Flash and all these other people. It didn't feel like a cheap popcorn fest. It felt like everything really mattered. It felt like looking at a fine painting in a museum, maybe with a few scratches on it, but still, you're looking at a painting nonetheless. It was like reading something of great ancient literature. You know, these DC heroes are like the modern day Greek gods. Say what you will about them, but people love the idea of these great larger-than-life heroes going through life and death and time and all these things to save the world and bring justice. Everything felt more bigger and more personal. And maybe they were getting a bit carried away with a bit of sequel baiting, but hey, that was a problem with this whole series to begin with. Yes, this film still has its open flaws. I think it's no secret that this take on an extended universe is trying to cash in on what Marvel did. In fact, this whole series wouldn't even exist if Marvel didn't make their cinematic universe, so I can hardly blame them for trying to make a success, but the desperation is still there. And even though the sequel baiting is still there, at least Justice League worked well as its own story this time. Not only did it depict an epic battle, but also a tale of loss and love and overcoming great odds. You see, the reason why people loved the Wonder Woman, almost said Wonder Woman, I'm watching too much Wonder Vision. The reason people loved Wonder Woman and Aquaman and Shazam was because they worked well individually. The reason people didn't take too well to Man of Steel, and especially Batman vs. Superman and Justice League, was because those movies were trying a bit too hard to be something that they were not. Although I do have some people like my friend Brooks, Squid Jedi, who would argue that Man of Steel is actually a really good movie. And I can see where they're coming from. I think Man of Steel was trying to aim for the specific tone, but maybe it didn't work. Maybe it could have been a bit more optimistic. Or maybe it should have gone grittier. I'm not sure how to improve Man of Steel, to be honest, but it wasn't the best superhero movie. Batman vs. Superman. Oof. There was too much focus on sequel baiting and not enough time on character development. And Suicide Squad only made things a lot more awkward. But now you have this cut, and characters are much more better developed, and things get more personal. Even people's least favorite Joker, played by Jared Leto, finally gained some credibility as a worthy depiction of Batman's greatest arch nemesis. Mild spoiler alert, Batman has a nightmare. A dark nightmare? And Batman and Joker have quite a serious conversation about consequence and alterations of timelines. You can tell that the two of them are quite life-weary, but at the same time, they're still rivals. And my friends were glad to see Deathstroke, even if his scene was with the awkward rendition of Lex Luthor. Again, Jesse Eisenberg, Zack Snyder. It's not that I hate you, it's just that the casting was not a good choice. You should have should have hired Jesse Eisenberg as Riddler. That's a much more fitting casting choice. A significant amount of celebrity cameos here and there. Yet even the celebrities fit their character quite well. There's J.K. Simmons, clearly not being J. Jonah Jameson, but does really well at morphing himself into a different character. I think the bushy mustache helps. Willem Dafoe talking to Aquaman. Jason Momoa is awesome as Aquaman. I was half expecting, this is my humorous side, but I was expecting Willem Dafoe to stand up and say, "Let the tomb strike ye dead, Aquaman! Hark!" Willem Dafoe's American, but that accent he puts on is so authentic. Oh yeah, the other scenes I loved. There was a group of people singing to Aquaman as he was leaving the village that he protects. And I heard that the music played a more serious role in establishing different moods and different feelings. It made the film feel that much more personal. And you've probably noticed that I haven't spoken too much about the more grittier violence. I focus more on the thematics and meanings within the narratives. But I can sense, yeah, they're not playing around this time. It makes for even more brutal battle scenes, like in the flashback battle scene. And I think there was some more authenticity too, like when Wonder Woman was investigating these ancient tombs. Much more thematics on self-sacrifice, on ambition, on bravery, and so many other things. And even some jokes that work, like Quicksilver scene, obviously a bit of an homage to Quicksilver. No, Flash! The Flash's scene, very similar to Quicksilver. And you get so much emotion and brilliant character introduction to him. And it all works beautifully. Cyborg also has a beautifully made character introduction. And everything is well explained. And the way the film ends... You know, it's interesting. You could watch all the way up to part 6 and be satisfied, but then the epilogue is wrapping up everything, but also teasing a little bit more to come. You could get off at part 6 and be satisfied, but for the hardcore DC fans, I think the epilogue might be worth it. And then comes something very personal. The end credits. Now, this song can debatably not fit the overall movie as a whole, but it does fit the passion of the director. Why? The credits specifically say, "For Autumn." You see, Autumn was Zack Snyder's daughter, and during the filmmaking of Justice League, she committed suicide at the age of 17. So in honor of Zack Snyder's personal loss, they play Autumn's favorite song, Hallelujah. This singer is just singing her heart out here. And looking at this film as a whole, it just makes me think, wow, this is not just a story about superheroes. This is the story about a single man's ambition to let his vision come to light. And all the trials and turmoils he had to face to make that vision a reality, as much as Batman trying to fulfill the vision of having all the Justice League members come together. There's a few doubts, there's a few hesitations along the way, like what could possibly go wrong with like alternative timelines and things like that. But you gotta have faith that in the end it will work and that people will love it and that it will speak to people on a deep level. And I'm looking at this film and it's clearly not the best superhero movie I've ever seen, but there is just so much passion and epic cinematic feelings to it. I can't help but admire it. And I never thought I'd say this, but Zack Snyder, I'm impressed. Bravo, Zack Snyder. Bravo. It's beginning to make me think about The Thief and the Cobbler. This was one of the most ambitious... No, actually, scratch that. The most ambitious animated film ever made. It was made by this guy here, Richard Williams, who animated Roger Rabbit. He was passionate for the craft of animation and tried to make a whole film dedicated to that craft. The Thief and the Cobbler. Now, he spent over 3 decades trying to make this film come to be, but because he spent too long, studios made their own cheap version based on all of his efforts. It was all gone to waste because that version sucked. But then, a passionate fan managed to edit some removed footage together and made Richard Williams' incomplete but still consistent vision to reality. It was cinematic, it was visually stunning. And even though it's not the best movie, the passion is clearly there. It's strange how much this can also reflect here. If a film's not that great, then I can still admire the passion that's going on behind it. And perhaps knowing the history behind it in real life can make you respect the craftsmanship it went into making the story. Because it may be here that Zack's kind of a misunderstood hero here. Just someone who makes honest mistakes along the way, but is willing to make up for them. I've been hearing people say that Zack Snyder's a great guy. And you can be a great guy and be a great filmmaker at the same time. You don't have to be a morally bankrupt person to make a film. Just saying. I just look back at today's movies where everyone is so focused on short-term pleasure, but they're not focusing on anything meaningful and long-sustaining, because the greatest stories are the ones that stay with us, the ones that mean something. Whether based on real life or in the fictional realm of pop culture, the greatest stories ever told are the ones that make us think, the ones that make us reflect, the ones that challenge us personally, the ones that cause conversations, the ones that make us reflect on life in a deep and meaningful sense. That is the beauty of storytelling. It helps us become better than who we are. It helps us display messages for people to understand. Art can define and improve and shape cultures. Sometimes art can change culture for the worst in a propaganda kind of sense, but other times it can help people to think with nuanced themes and topics. And by this definition of passion alone within artistic endeavor, I can't help but respect Zack Snyder's version of Justice League. And it's beginning to make me think, man, if every filmmaker in Hollywood right now had that kind of ambition, that kind of passion, we'd be getting masterpiece after masterpiece after masterpiece. But they never really cared for music, do they? As those baffled kings compose their hallelujah. So how would I rate Zack Snyder's Justice League? Well, it's still heavily flawed, but it's heavily passionate too. I think I'm willing to give this an 8.9 out of 12. Clearly not the greatest film I've ever seen, but definitely one of the most ambitious films I've ever seen. And as flawed as this film was, I hope to see more films like it. Man, I'm thinking about director's cuts now, and I'm thinking about how I would adapt stories. What did you all think of Zack Snyder's Justice League? Let me know in the comments down below. Who knows, maybe we'll start a conversation about what it'll lead up to. After all, anything can happen, anything's possible, but not everything is probable.